Declare the meeting open to the public. Could I just remind members then of all of the protocols around the use of electronic devices and so on, and could I invite members to declare any interest they have relevant to the issues being discussed at today's meeting. None to be declared. Then we move on then to apologies. We have an apology from Dolores Kelly. Any other apologies to record? No other apologies to record. We will move on then to draft minutes. Next item is page 5 of your pack. Are members content with the draft minutes for accuracy for the meeting of the 25th of September 2014? Members content? Okay, thank you members for that. Moving on then, just a couple of items under Chairperson's business. Just to remind ourselves that this morning we will open an inquiry session, and we have 2 evidence sessions, one with Mr. Paddy McIntyre and Mr. Alan McCauley, both here are here right this morning. So we'll just welcome both of you here, gentlemen, this morning. The expectation will be, because we have other committee business as well, of course, will be we may conclude this session by 12, but just to make people aware, Paddy McIntyre, I think, has to leave to catch a flight early lunchtime. Paddy, is that right?
Okay, at 1 o'clock, sir.
Okay, well, hopefully you'll not be here that. Okay, so just to make people aware of that. Just in terms of the committee has been asked again to support a business in the community event. It's a graduation event for it's a project called Aiming Higher. It's a mentoring programme, and we've supported this before. So the committee's been asked to support that particular initiative. They're having an event in the Assembly on 23rd of October. Now this clashes with our committee, which will be out of the building here, actually down the Housing Rights Services offices. But business in the community are content if we, as the committee, sponsor that, then another MLA from somewhere else, they'll get another MLA to speak at that. Members content then? If so, then somebody will get 3 signatures. We need, as you know, 3 nominating members. So we'll ask to get that form signed before we leave here this morning. Thank you, members. Okay, on matters arising. Just a couple of points. You'll recall that at the briefing last week, Stuart Cuddy referred to a letter he had sent to John McPeak. The committee had said we would request sight of that and any subsequent correspondence, but I'm advised that on examination of the material that we already have that material, so it's in this week's pack for your information. It's in the tabled items, yeah, is it?
No, it's in the actual pack.
It's in the actual pack? Okay. Okay, so again then, moving on, another item, matters arising. Members agreed last week on it, and it's, obviously this is ongoing, but the draft schedule of witnesses to give oral evidence for the inquiry, and the commissioning letters have already been issued to those witnesses accordingly. Now, 2 of the witnesses that we had referred to were Peter Cook and Michael Jennings, and they have indicated they will be unable to attend on the dates that we had requested. And it's proposed now that they would attend here on the 6th of November. And obviously you'll have that in your forward work programme, page 110. But could I actually suggest that in terms of scheduling witnesses, I mean, a bit awkward for Kevin not to come back here to be kind of meeting. Given the fact that he's actually trying to schedule witnesses, the committee will always agree to schedule. But Kevin has to go back and forth between different individuals about securing dates and so on with people's diaries, and sometimes that actually changes and then might impinge on other evidence sides. Could I ask the committee's approval to let Kevin just continue to work away with the scheduling for witnesses? I mean, on the basis that the committee will have approved the witnesses in the first instance. Are members content to do that? It's just to see them coming back here every kind of week trying to reschedule people's diaries at committee stage. Members happy enough with that?
Yep.
Gregory?
Sure. Given the time delay we have, I mean, I think we should, whatever appropriate point, as soon as possible, that witnesses can appear, they should appear without, if the clerk can slot them in, and we get the notice and go ahead with it, rather than allow yet more interminable delay.
Yeah. Well, I think that actually would help, Gregory, so that's what we're trying to do. So thanks for that. So members then content. We had actually agreed, well, these hadn't been scheduled, but I think we'll just work on the basis on the committee's decision now. We will just go ahead and schedule witnesses then as soon as possible. And you have enough cabinets just to proceed on that basis then, so there's no need then to discuss any other kind of witnesses. You're happy enough then, you know who you have approval to call as a witness?
Yes, Chair, just clarification around the former Minister, Mr. McCausland, who we haven't actually formally agreed. He hasn't formally agreed to call, but I'm assuming that the committee will want to hear from him. And the former Managing Director of Red Sky, Mr. Norman Hayes, who we believe we've sourced an address for. And Chair, the only other outstanding are there are 3 MLAs who are involved in meetings, which we haven't yet contacted. There's again no formal decision was taken on that.
Okay, so I mean, a number of these people actually had asked for a written submission, which they provided, and then the committee had agreed initially that we would then, on the back of the submissions, then you would determine whether or not you wanted to invite people. It's up to the committee to do that. One other reference that Kevin has drawn my attention to is that we had previously agreed to take evidence from John Rooney. He's the former head of finance with Red Sky, but again we're advised that he actually was only in post a very short period of time. So the question really is there any point in bringing a person who was only in post a very short period of time, and given that we're not examining the finances of that particular company or any company? I mean, entirely in the hands of the committee, but I mean, it's just a big question mark over the necessity to call Mr. Rooney at this point in time. Are people happy enough then we can defer that for now? Okay, I'll take that as yep. All right. Then just the final point there is that we have the committee had agreed to hold our meeting on the 23rd of October in the office of the Housing Rights Services, and that's in Belfast City Centre. So, 23rd of October. And we're actually going to try and keep the committee business as kind of reasonably short as we can, just to allow an opportunity to speak informally with the Private Tenants Forum, which the Housing Rights Services have actually requested. So, and there'll be a lot of lunch provided down there. So, members who just confirm their attendance or apologies with Kevin or Stephen or somebody here. Okay. Fair enough. Okay, so we're then moving then into the inquiry session, and as I reminded people, then we had Paddy McIntyre. We had Paddy, you're up first this morning. Thank you for attending, and Paddy has was requested or provided a briefing to the committee, and that's on page 29 of your pack. People get that. And obviously just to remind ourselves, this is just in respect of phase 3 of the inquiry actually. Okay. Members got their packet all there, yeah. Okay, Paddy, as is the norm here, we first of all want to thank you for attending here this morning, and also for providing us with a written paper before coming here to let members have an opportunity to read that. We are dealing with phase 3 of the inquiry, and we have provided you with, I think, the relevant terms of reference and so on. So, haven't had the opportunity to provide us with a paper. I want to thank you for that. Is there anything you want to add to that or say before we open up for members?
No, Chairman. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to come along here today. I'm not going to go through the brief since, I imagine most of the issues will arise during questions. I think the only thing I want to say, it's about 4 years since I left the Housing Executive. I don't have access to all of the papers, not that they've been denied to me in any way. And sometimes I will not remember things, and I may as well say that at the outset. And where I feel that my knowledge might be doubtful, I would suggest that I might want to check what I am saying with the Housing Executive as well, just for the record.
No, not a problem, Paddy, and feel free to make those clarifications at any stage. You have a briefing paper in your table then, in fact. Actually, just the members for. Let's see there. Was there a number on there? Page 3, actually. Yeah, table then, in fact, members. Thank you for that. Okay. John McCann.
Sure. Warren Petty, you're very welcome this morning. In your briefing to the committee, it said that from the outset there were significant complaints from tenants, community representatives and politicians about the quality of work, the completion of work, the attitude of Red Sky staff, the people. Could you elaborate on that?
Sorry, sir?
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I suppose, from the letting of the contracts the second phase of contracts in 2007, when Red Sky, I think, won 5 contracts locally, uniquely amongst the rest of the contractors, there were more complaints coming about Red Sky, particularly from the west of the city, than all the other contractors together. And they had a history previously, but certainly, one of the successes of Egan from the early 2000s was that, and I certainly knew this from experience around councils and community groups and so forth, there had been a significant improvement in the level of service tenants were getting, which was demonstrated by a number of, not least of all, I went to the Housing Council every month and I attended district councils regularly and attended community associations regularly. Maintenance as a big sore for us went off the agenda, but uniquely Red Sky from 2007, there was more problems landing at my desk from public representatives such as yourself, West Belfast Community Centre and so forth, that we weren't experiencing elsewhere.
And when these were investigated, was it substantiated that there was a high level of poor work?
Well, I think the report of the Repairs and Investigation Unit, RIU, plus the follow-up report from ASM Harworth justified that. Yeah. But across the board as well, it was clear that not only were the problems related to West Belfast, they also were occurring in other parts of the city as well, and in Abbey.
Yeah. The other thing was that there have been some people that have said, certainly at this inquiry in the past, that the complaints against Red Sky were motivated by sectarianism. Did you find anything like that?
Well, that's not something I've any knowledge of, to be quite honest. If you look at Red Sky across the board in the districts, the three Belfast districts and 2 Newton Abbey, what I can say is that if you took their contracts for fault failure, theirs was coming out at 3.6% as opposed to a provincial average of 1.7%. So, the complaints against Red Sky as a whole were higher than we were getting. Our faults against Red Sky were higher than across the rest of the province.
Okay, Jim.
It appears that in February 2008 you received a letter from the chairman of Red Sky, and in the course of that letter he is reported to have written to you, "I hope you would acknowledge the communication is a very honest endeavour on my part, which in setting out some observations one can avoid having to wash dirty linen in public, albeit if that is the course we must take, so be it." Do you recall that letter?
I do indeed, Chairman. I remember this, I do.
Did you ever reply to that letter?
I probably didn't reply, but I think the letter may have been replied to by someone else in the organisation. I'm not sure. I know the letter. It was passed out to the relevant staff for comment and for reply.
You don't seem to have a copy of it.
It may well be there wasn't a reply, members, maybe.
What did you understand the reference to avoiding washing dirty linen in public to mean?
Well, the relationship, and I think I mentioned that in my briefing, the relationship between our staff in West Belfast and Red Sky was not good.
Yes, I think we've gathered that,
Yeah,
but what did you understand that to be saying?
Well, I think Red Sky would allege that in West Belfast that, and it goes back to a comment that was made earlier, that there was a sectarian influence in how they were dealt with.
So you believe that to be a reference to that particular allegation?
Yeah. Now, whether there's any truth in that or not, I'm not in a position to say. Colin might maybe know a bit more about it than I did, but that was what I read into it. It was a comment amongst a substantial letter, if I recall. Mr. Alistair, is it?
The chairman at that time of Red Sky was Mr. Krishnan.
Yeah.
He had previously had a role with the Housing Executive.
He had been on the board, and he was also on the audit committee for a period of time. And when the Red Sky issue came up, he immediately left the meeting and and resigned from the audit committee prior to the next meeting in March, whatever it was, 2007 or something like that effect, March 2000. Yeah.
March 2007.
Yeah.
and then immediately got into discussions with you and others in respect of an alleged overcharge of some £680,000 by Red Sky.
Are you sure that's the figure? I don't.
Sorry, 260.
I don't think. I mean, that certainly doesn't.
Sorry,
isn't a
yes,
figure I recognise at all. It's certainly from my time
I'm
there.
mixing the two figures. 260.
Yes. Well, he was chairman. By the way, I did have a couple of meetings with him and his company, along with other members of relevant staff. I mean, what he was putting the case around that overpayment was that we were trying to claim back it was not justified. But it turns out, by the way, for a large part of it, it wasn't justified because Red Sky installed kitchens to higher standard, which was signed off by our local staff. The eventual claim, I think, was settled around about 20,000, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
yes.
And
I think we did
part of the
hear-
problem was we were undermined by our staff by certifying higher kitchens to a higher price. Now, interestingly, subsequent to all of that, we actually increased our specification of kitchens because the kitchens we were installing just weren't good enough.
Yes. I think we've already heard the evidence previous weeks that the 260 was negotiated down to 20,000. And key to that was Mr. Kushner.
I met him a couple of times while he was presenting the case to the company. I was not involved in the subsequent discussions around negotiated settlement. And that settlement, by the way, was based on legal advice, plus advice from our contracts claims people who have a lot of experience in dealing with claims and who also were QSs as well.
You're also aware that the Public Accounts Committee had something to say about Mr. Kushner's involvement in those negotiations.
Well, I mean, they said it, yes. I mean,
It was unethical.
well, I mean, that's their view. I mean, he's the chairman of a company, he's a well-known local businessman. He actually, interesting, I think, was also in the audit committee of OFMDF, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think he's been in many places.
Yes, well, but I mean, that's their view. So it is.
But I think the point being that he'd been in the audit committee of the housing executive, a board member, and then from all the knowledge gained there, a quick transition to negotiating downwards very substantially an alleged debt by
But I
Red
mean,
Sky.
to be clear about this, we undermined ourselves by our maintenance officers locally, specifying which they should not have done and were disciplined for higher standards of kitchens which Red Sky installed, and say subsequently increased the standard for our kitchens.
Yes. And you obviously signed off as accounting officer that reduction to 20.
No, I wouldn't have had to have done because I was aware of it, by the way, because it was in the
You wouldn't have signed that off?
Pardon?
You wouldn't have signed that off?
No, it was within the delegated limit of the director. And now I was advised of it because of the nature of it. I was advised that a settlement of 20,000 had been agreed, which was cleared by legal and also which was cleared by our contracts claims people.
Mr. Cushnan told the Northern Ireland Audit Office that he attended the settlement meeting after discussions with two of the most senior executives of the housing executive. That's you and your colleague, Mr. McCaughey.
Yes, I met him, I think, and then there was discussions around the settlement after that, which I wasn't party to.
Yes, he attended the settlement meeting after discussions with two of the most senior executives, as it was considered his participation would be beneficial to both the housing executive and Red Sky in seeking to diffuse a controversial issue.
Well,
Do you quibble at all with his assessment?
I don't
there?
exactly remember that, but I mean, if Mr. Cushnan said, well, there certainly was a discussion. Now, whether or not who agreed who should be at the meeting, I don't recollect, to be quite honest.
Well, he's putting it forward that his participation was thought by the two executives to be beneficial in seeking to diffuse.
Now, I'm not in a position to contest that because I don't remember the conversation.
Well, do you remember thinking that it would be a good idea to have
I'm
Mr.
not being
Cushnan on
evasive
board?
here. I'm not being evasive here, but I don't recall the conversation at all. And I mean, on reflection, I mean, he was the chairman of the company.
Yes, but did you approach him to come in as some sort of broker?
I don't think I did.
So can you help us who did?
Well, I arranged at his request. I arranged to meet Red Sky management and him as chair to discuss that claim. Okay. Thereafterwards, he made a number of points, particularly around the kitchens, and it went back into the system, back into the process, and was dealt with as any other contractual claim would be.
So you can't help us whether you come up with the idea of let's involve Frank Cushnan, or not?
And again, I'm not being evasive here. It could be the case he's right. I don't recollect the conversation.
Had you any qualms, or would you have had any qualms, given that he'd been on the audit committee?
He was the chair of Red Sky.
Yes.
So he was. I mean, the audit office have come to a view whether they're right or not. It's no matter. I'm sure Mr. Cushnan wouldn't accept that.
Was Mr. Cushnan someone well known to you?
Well, he had been on the board of the housing executive for quite a few
Did
years.
you know him otherwise?
Not all that well, but I would know him now. Yes.
So, whenever it came to this suggestion about dirty linen, did you interpret that as a threat?
Not really. It was a course of a pretty, if I'm not mistaken, it was a letter of 4 or 5 pages.
Maybe.
Yeah, it was quite a long letter and it was in there amongst a number of other things. But no, I didn't.
As the chief executive of an organisation like the Housing Executive, to have anyone writing to you suggesting that if we can't sort this, there'll be some washing of dirty linen in public.
Wouldn't affect me at all.
You didn't take that as a
I
threat?
wouldn't, absolutely, but it wouldn't stop me from doing what had to be done either. So it wouldn't.
What would you say to the suggestion that over the years, right from they first got into difficulties back in 2000 with contracts, through 2006-07, right up, that Red Sky had a very charmed existence in terms of being able to get itself out of difficulties with the Housing Executive?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the audit office sums it up pretty well in their table in their report. Does demonstrate back from 2000 that, yeah, I mean, if you go back to the allegations about impropriety, where we actually sacked the maintenance officer as a result of it, and on independent appeal, by the independent appeal, he got his job back, much to our regret and surprise. You are right. I can think of very few other contractors, I suppose, that we have had as much trouble as we have had over the years with Red Sky.
But they seem to come out of it until the end fairly well each time.
Well, and that's not quite true, because if you go back to 2000, for example, they actually claimed that we owed them £173,000, which they didn't get off us. It was negotiated down, or it was actually demonstrated down to nothing. So it was, I mean, if looking back on it, I suppose the two things which I regret in a way. One was that we tried to stop Red Sky from tendering for future work. We got legal advice to the fact that we couldn't do that. We tried to terminate their contract in the year 2007. And eventually legal advice was that we should not proceed. So really, I suppose what happened was, when we commissioned the RAU within the Housing Executive to carry out a very detailed study around about April of 2009, that demonstrated very clearly that there were problems with the quality of the work and overpayment and so forth. And at that time, I took a view shared by the chair of the Audit Committee that really we needed to get somebody forensically to go through this in a big way to make sure we could make it stick this time. And you've probably seen the SM Harris report, and that has subsequently led to the termination of their contract. I mean, I suspect, by the way, the nature of the business with Red Sky was that if you looked at it, I think at the termination of their contract, there was a claim by the Housing Executive of about 600,000, possibly. I suspect if they hadn't, that's where you're, I suspect if they had not gone into administration or whatever it was, we'd still be arguing over what money was due by them. I mean, the construction, as you know, is not a fine. It's not a fine business here. So there's always discussion around claims.
There were several stages in this saga with Red Sky, and on a number of occasions, one can observe that they come out of it better than one might have expected.
Or we might have hoped as well.
Yes. When they were in difficulties, was there any political lobbying on their behalf?
Not to my knowledge, not to me personally.
We know ultimately there was. Well, after you were gone.
But not in my time.
You say not to you personally?
No. Nor am I aware of it with anybody else, by the way.
Okay. One of the low points may have been the fact that there seemed to be a desire on the part of Red Sky to have a certain individual in West Belfast removed from post. Isn't that right? Mr.
Again,
Ballantyne?
well, I don't, that never was represented to me at all, I have to tell you. Mr. Ballantyne, I mean, do you want me to go through just what the position
Well,
was?
just let me try and remind you.
Right.
Is it not the case that the Red Sky Operations Manager, Ms. Gazzard, wrote to Mr. McLaughlin
Right.
in November 2008 expressing a deep concern in relation to certain personalities who remain working in the West Belfast office? We trust appropriate actions will be taken to address this in the near future.
Does
Were
that
you
say-
aware of that letter?
I saw it sometime after the event, by the way. I didn't see it when
Did
it...
Mr. McLaughlin not show that to you?
No, not at the time, but I did see it. And the letter should have been replied to, by the way, with a lot of force. I gather from reading the Audit Office there was a reply drafted, a very strong reply drafted,
went.
but never went for whatever reason.
You can't help us why
You're
it didn't
assuming
go.
that... Pardon?
You can't help us why it didn't
No,
go.
I can't. No, but I got the letter some months afterwards, and by which stage it was, it was just too late to be doing anything about it. But you're assuming that applies to Gary Ballantyne, are you? Does it say
Well,
Gary Ballantyne?
No, it says West Belfast
Right, no,
office, but
Gary Ballantyne,
I'm making the correlation
well,
between the fact.
I need to correct that. Gary Ballantyne's move was nothing to do with that letter. There was a plan.
Coincided in time.
Yes, and indeed, by the way, when I was approached by Morris Johnson, the area manager, about plans that he had in place to move Gary as part of a planned rotation programme, I asked Morris to defer it because it was not, because people might read something like that into it.
Well, Mr. McNair, it coincided in time. Is that right?
I think-
Chronologically, it happened shortly after this letter.
You've got the letter there, and I mean the discussion with Gary Ballantyne and his rotation went on for about 6 months. I wouldn't be sure of the time, but what I can assure you is that letter had nothing to do whatsoever with a planned move for Gary Ballantyne.
That's what you want us to believe.
And I mean, I can assure you, by the way, it was absolutely nothing to do with the area manager in Belfast. And I would like to go through the history with it. Do you mind?
Did Mr. Ballantyne then subsequently receive an apology for how he was treated?
I don't know. If he did, it was after my time, I think. I mean, there was an independent person appointed to review that after I left.
So it's
And
mere
my
coincidence.
understanding,
One at a time, please.
right, my understanding is that that independent personnel consultant said that the move was part of a planned rotation which the area manager had in mind for some years before that. It may not have been well handled, but at the end of the day, it was not related to anything to do with Red Sky.
Okay, so what you want the committee to conclude is that it was mere coincidence that Red Sky wrote asking for the removal of unnamed
Yeah.
personnel, and then the relevant manager was at the same time moved. That's mere
Yeah,
coincidence.
but I mean, I did defer that move and asked the area manager to defer it for a while because it might have seemed to people that there was some connection to it, But it
Did
was-
you refer that letter from Ms. Gazzard to the board of the Housing Executive?
No. It was seen as an operational matter. In the board, yeah.
Did you refer Mr. Cushnan's letter that we've previously talked about
Yeah,
to the
would-
board?
Would have been an operational matter. I mean, we
Or
get
were you
loads of-
keeping the board in the dark?
No, absolutely not. And we want to totally refute that.
Because it might be rather surprising, would it not, that I think both the audit committee and the board were kept in the dark about those two pieces of correspondence.
Well, I mean, if you think, Ms. Salas, the amount of correspondence comes into our organisation, I mean, it was an operational matter. So
It's not every day you get a letter from a company threatening to wash dirty linen in public, is it?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time I've seen it.
What's-
So it wouldn't,
Do you not think that's something you should at least tell the board about?
Well, I think probably in hindsight, there's lots of things that when things get to a certain stage, it may have been wiser to have told the board at the time. But I mean, at that time, the judgment was it was an operational matter which would be dealt with by officers.
Were you concealing such matters from the board?
Absolutely not. No.
But they weren't told about them.
Well, they weren't told about it, but it was certainly not. There's no suggestion whatsoever. I hope from you that it was a matter of deliberate suppression of that.
I'm asking you,
Well, I'm saying to you,
did
it
you
was
make a
not.
conscious decision not?
Absolutely not.
So how was it then that the board wasn't told?
Because it was an operational matter involving a contractor with whom we were in a dispute. I mean, we wouldn't. Our board. I mean, if you think the size of the organisation, our board operates at a strategic level.
But this was a major contractor. for the housing executive.
In the scale of things, it was one contractor of probably maybe a couple hundred
Yes,
were
but
dealing
this
with.
was a contractor about whom you've told us already you were receiving multiple representations from public representatives in West Belfast, etc., about the quality of work.
Yeah.
And then you get a letter threatening to wash dirty linen in public, and you don't think, I should really tell the board about this.
But, I mean, on reflection, it might have been wiser to have done so, but that's a long way away from saying that it was deliberately withheld from the board.
When did you take to the board the issue about Mr. Ballantyne?
I'm not quite sure it ever was at the board now in my time.
That too never went to the board, even retrospectively, even after.
It may have done after I left, but certainly I know that after I left, there was a HR consultant appointed by the Director of Personnel Management Services to review the position around the transfer of Gary Ballantyne. And, I'm sure, I don't know whether the Director then took that to the board at that stage, but certainly that review was done after I left.
Well, did Red Sky discuss personnel issues with you, never mind correspondence?
I have no recollection of that. I mean, the discussions I had with Red Sky were around two key things. One was that claim, and subsequently I met them on a couple of occasions around the whole issue to do with their performance in West Belfast.
I'll take on a couple of our members here, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah. Mickey Brady and Gregory.
Yeah, Paddy, thanks very much for the presentation. It's just the Public Accounts Committee, they had a report out, and in that they expressed, and I quote, very serious concerns about the competence and capability of senior management within the housing sector over a number of years, and they highlighted what they considered to be significant and serious breakdowns in corporate governance and accountability. Would you accept that particularly allowed Red Sky and other contractors basically to do what they were doing?
Well, first of all, can I say it is, it's a very sweeping conclusion to come to on the basis of one contract and one audit that there was something wrong with the stewardship of the housing executive and the governance of the housing executive. I mean, you've got to judge it across the whole breadth of the organisation. And whilst the audit office said that, I mean, there's a significant number of other internal and external reviews of the organisation over the years that I was there, which actually had a lot of very positive things to say about the stewardship of the housing executive. For example, the health check, which was carried out about 2010, whilst it had a number of things to say about things we needed to do, it was extremely complimentary about the organisation. The PwC report into the future of the organisation was extremely complimentary about the leadership of the organisation. RPA was complimentary about the leadership and stewardship of the organisation. Numerous charter marks, quality awards, all of that had very positive things to say about the housing executive. So you cannot read the audit office across and say the organisation was badly led or badly stewarded or whatever the word might be. Likewise, every year we delivered our business performance targets to the department, and, which is a very important point, each year I get an annual assurance from both the audit office and our head of internal audit around the governance and stewardship of it. So I think I really want to make the point, you cannot read that across the organisation.
Just for the record, the report that you're referring to is the Public Accounts Committee, not the Audit Office.
And it's also just in following that, the Public Accounts Committee criticised the fact that it seemed that Mr. McAlly's division had for many years been out of control. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. The reason why I've accepted it is I've just demonstrated to you that across the piece, the organisation has been extremely successful over the years in delivering what it is supposed to do.
Thank you.
Gregory?
Yeah. Mr. McIntyre, you were in post up until 2010.
Yeah.
And you had said in answer to a series of other questions that the Red Sky question, the issue of there being some sort of sectarian allegation, that your response was that you had been aware of issues in terms of the types of contract earlier on, and then the issue arose about some sort of sectarian inference. Is that what you said?
I'm not quite sure, Mr. Campbell, that...
You'd said that you'd been aware for some time about the problems with Red Sky.
Oh, going back to 20, yes, going back to 2000, yes. Yeah,
And that was very early on in your term.
it was, yeah.
But then, at what stage then did you become aware of some inference in the later stages of your tenure that there was some sort of sectarian undertone?
Well, from Red Sky started their contracts in 2007, that's the 3 in Belfast and the 2 in Newtownabbey. There were problems with West Belfast in terms of how Red Sky, I mean, the response times were very poor, they were running behind time, the quality of the work wasn't all that good, but also in going on at that stage, which was not common to the other contracts, was the relationship between our local staff in West Belfast and the contracting staff was quite toxic.
Right.
Now, whether it was sectarian, I don't know, Mr. Campbell,
Okay.
but it was toxic.
Right. Now, you'd said that the Red Sky contract was one of a number, maybe 100 or thereabouts.
Well, of contractors dealing with the housing anxiety, but of the response maintenance contracts that we had, I think probably we had 20 throughout the province.
Right.
Okay, but I mean, we would deal with lots of other contractors as well.
Were there problems of that nature with any of the other contractors?
Relationships,
Relationships as well as workmanship?
not to the point where it ever reached my ears.
So, does that mean then there
Well,
may have been...
I mean, I would be in a local office once a week, and it was never really an issue. Maintenance almost went off our agenda in terms of the type of public opinion, the problems that it was causing by public representatives and so forth as a result of the introduction of those weekend contracts. So the answer to it is not. I didn't generally get it, nor did I get it in localities all that much either.
But you've said in answer to me just now and to an earlier question, in terms of the sectarian undertone as it related to Red Sky, that you didn't seem to be aware of specific knowledge of that. Is that right?
No, I was aware of the toxic relationship, and I mean, I'm taking that. I mean, one of the allegations Red Sky would have made was that because they were a firm from East Belfast working in West Belfast, there were problems being put in front of them that they weren't getting anywhere else. Now, whether that was the case or not, I don't know. Colm, I think, might be able to say a bit more about that because he asked somebody to investigate it. But it was not a common problem that we were getting anywhere else.
Right. It's just that last week when we had Ray in front of us, I had put a similar question to him, and his answer was there's no question whatsoever of any sectarianism.
I'm not saying there is sectarian. What I'm
No,
saying,
I know that,
yeah,
but
I'm
he
saying
was
there
quite
really.
specific.
He said there was none.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the organisation, and I know you and I have had the discussions before around the makeup of the workforce of the housing exam, but it is not a sectarian organisation in any way.
Right. Yeah. As you say, we have had quite a number of discussions down through the years because you'll be aware, as most people are, that the organisation does have a problem recruiting from a very large section of our community and has had for quite a number of years, decades. So that's why I wanted to try and get to this issue of sectarianism. Mr. Cuddy seemed to be quite specific and precise, but you're not being as specific.
Well, what I'm saying is there were allegations made. Now, whether that was the case or not, I don't think was ever. I mean, it's not something that the organisation generally would get, so it wouldn't, allegations about sectarian behaviour.
Yeah, but what I'm really getting at here is the allegations were there, as you say. Everybody can accept that. Mr. Cuddy appeared to be very forthright in repudiating those allegations. You seem to be saying that you didn't have as much knowledge as Mr. Cuddy had, but you were the chief executive.
No, what I'm saying to you is the relationships between the staff of our local West Belfast office and the staff of Red Sky were toxic. And one of the things that did emerge, and Red Sky would have said this, that they were being treated in a sectarian way by local Belfast staff. Now, that was never proven one way. All I can tell you is it was an allegation that was made by Red Sky.
Okay. Well, then, just a final question, then, Chair. I mean, you were aware then of the allegation.
Yeah.
And as you've said, the company was from East Belfast. They were doing some work in West Belfast. And that was happening in the context of the overall organisation that were awarding the contract for a period of decades had an issue. And as you say, you and I have had quite a number of conversations about how you address the problem of ensuring that your organisation of over 3,000 people attracted equitable numbers from both communities, because I hadn't done that. Did nobody at that stage then say, well, here's an allegation about Red Sky, which is a sectarian undertone, and given the bigger picture that we already know is out there for many years, maybe we better investigate this very, very comprehensively?
I think my colleague might have something a wee bit more to add to what I'm saying here, because I do think there was some investigation carried out at the time. I'm not trying to avoid what you're saying. I do think you would agree that we have taken a lot of the steps to try and attract Protestant people into housing executive over the years you have, and I'd like you, I'm sure you would acknowledge that.
Yeah, I do acknowledge that, and the work that I've been doing with a number of your staff hopefully has contributed to that.
Yeah.
But you say, Mr. McCaughey, maybe able to help us.
Yeah, I think there was some look at those allegations taken at the time.
Okay, Tommy?
Thanks very much. Could I just start on maybe the last point that Gregory made? And I know you said you can't really throw a great deal of light on it, Harry. But, you know, surely as part of this investigation and any conversations you had, would you have been made aware of the fact that there clearly was a sectarian campaign against Red Sky by public representatives in West Belfast, by tenants, and indeed attacks on their vans, attacks on their personnel, ball
I think, sorry, a second. Tommy, just a wee second. I mean, I don't mind giving people a bit of latitude, as Rennie said last week. I'm not going to have it on record that there was factually established sectarian harassment of any company by any representative, because what you're making here is very sweeping and damaging accusations against people who are public representatives. So I'm just telling you the exercise causing, because I won't let that go down that road.
Well, you might not like the hear it.
It doesn't matter where I like it or not like it. I won't let.
First of all,
Sammy Wilson, excuse me.
Yeah.
Just making a point. I'm asking people to be professional in their approach here, because I'll instruct the person not to answer the question.
I hope, Chairman, there's no question of somebody being restricted in the nature of the question they're asking here.
No, but I'm not.
Because if there is, Chairman, calls into question the participation of some of us in the rest of this inquiry. If that's the route you're going to go down as a chair.
Just a second, let me deal with one question at a time here, okay? Because we're doing okay here, just to keep this professional. There's no restriction on any member asking questions, but we can't have it people putting factually incorrect statements on the record as facts. People can make their statements and make their allegations if they wish. They can't put on record and expect an official here, pardon me, to respond to something which is factually not established or not correct. That's all I'm saying.
Well,
let's not be generalising.
Let me then start. Let me start with one question, Harry. Were you aware that, for example, representatives of Sinn Féin in West Belfast made complaints to the housing executive about Red Sky?
About the quality of work, yes.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I would expect that from any public representative anywhere who was getting a service that wasn't really up to scratch, you know.
For the record, then, maybe the committee clerk could just give us some indication that since two of the representatives who made those complaints are here and therefore surely have some vested interest, did we get a declaration of interest being made at the beginning of this meeting?
No one has declared interest in respect of that issue.
Well,
so
sorry, Sammy, just a wee second, just because we can check all the legal advice and the procedural fairness rules and regulations, and I'm happy to do that. But I certainly am not aware, as me being an elected representative, because at that point in time, I don't recall making complaints in West Belfast. But that doesn't mean, I mean, other members of your own party, for example, made representations, and that's fine. People are entitled to make representations. That doesn't mean that anybody has an interest, because you well know a conflict of interest means you have some relevant or pecuniary or otherwise interest in a matter.
Well, I would have thought, Chairman, that there would be a conflict of interest if, having made allegations about and complaints about a particular firm, that would not then slant the view that you might take to questions being asked, and one of the reasons why you probably objected is some of the questions I'm asking now, questions being asked of those who come along and give evidence.
My only assertion will only be that people can't be putting on the record things which are not the case. That's all I'm saying. So let's keep it professional.
So, Paddy, I think the first thing I want to... that you did have a number, maybe even substantial complaints about Red Sky from Sinn Féin representatives in West Belfast.
And community representatives and SDLP, because
Yes.
frankly the service was very poor, and that's the reason why people are making representations and complaints.
Were you also aware of an ongoing campaign against Red Sky workers by elements in West Belfast, such as the attacks on vans, on personnel, etc.?
Well, I was aware of vans certainly being damaged. I also believe, I think that Sinn Féin representatives got involved in that to try and stop that from happening.
Were Red Sky employees described as red, white and blue sky?
I never in any meeting or from any public representative or community representative did I hear that ever expressed. First time I've heard it.
Yeah, okay. So there was. Would you have found the complaints that were made about the attacks on Red Sky equipment and employees in West Belfast, would you have had the same prevalence of complaints about attacks on contractors in other parts of Northern Ireland?
Generally speaking, in current days, no. I mean, it might have been an issue sometime in the past, but in recent times it has been. And I do know that local Sinn Féin and community reps tried to influence the local community, make sure that that does not continue.
So, being a Protestant firm from East Belfast, would you accept that Red Sky were singled out for special treatment in West Belfast?
No, not to my knowledge.
But you have said that they're.
But I mean, the reason why, well, yeah, I mean, it happened. I mean, I don't know why the reason that was, but the reason why we had them in our sites was because their performance was very poor. The reason why we were getting complaints from public representatives, community representatives, their performance was very poor. And I say I can't remember any contractor in a lot of years where we were getting the same volume of complaints. Now, we weren't getting those complaints across the piece, so we weren't, you know.
Yeah, and that might bring for a second, because you did say that their performance was about twice as bad as the performance of other contractors. I think
3.6 average,
3.6 to 1.8 or 9 or somewhere it was.
3.6 to 1.6 or 7, I think, you know.
Yeah, okay. And that most of these complaints emanated from West Belfast.
No, I didn't say that. Right. And the work we did, but the inspection we did was across all Red Sky contracts that they held, right? And their failure rate was around 3.6%, right, across all 5 of those contracts, only one of which was in West Belfast, right? The provincial failure rate was around 1.6 or 1.7%. Now, I can't get you what the failure rate was for West Belfast. I just don't have it to hand here, or the housing executive can supply it to you.
I think what you said, and this is what I wrote down. Hansard maybe show that I might have been inaccurate, but that there were more complaints from the west of the city than from the rest of the province.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and simply, can I just maybe explain what I mean by that? Maintenance complaints before we brought in the Egan contracts, and people may have comments or otherwise about it, and what I do know is what went off my hearing as I went around District Council, Community Association, and so forth, which I would have been doing regularly and going to the Housing Council. Maintenance wasn't an issue with public representatives any longer to the same extent it had been previously, with one exception, and that was from 2007. There was a build-up of complaints about Red Sky's performance in West Belfast. I mean, they would have recognised that themselves. They brought in additional arrangements to try and actually sort out the problem they were having in terms of delivery, both in terms of the quality of the work and in terms of the response times that they were delivering to the housing executive.
And see, just on the response times, you said that there was a toxic relationship between housing executive staff and Red Sky. Did that in any way contribute to the flow of information about repairs which were required, therefore delays in the time, hence having an impact on the performance that you've been talking about?
Are you suggesting that staff locally were making it difficult for Red Sky?
I mean, Red Sky, you've already said there was a toxic relationship. Yeah. Red Sky had made complaints about the relationship with staff, and indeed claimed it was sectarian. I mean, have when you say that the relationship was toxic, maybe you will explain how you came to that judgment and how it evidenced itself.
Well, I mean, part of the Egan contract style is partnership, and it certainly wasn't working in West Belfast for a variety of reasons. I mean, toxic, by the way, relation to toxic, it takes two sides to make that happen as well. So it does. I think Red Sky would probably admit at the time as well, some of the behaviour of some of their staff wasn't what they would have expected it to be. I mean, there were steps put in place, which Colin might want to explain a bit more about that, about how we tried to address those relationship issues.
So, if the communication and relationships were not good, then it is possible that some of the delay in getting repairs done may have been due to failures on the housing executive side.
Well, some, but my reading of it, and I mean, it was one of the few times I got involved to any great detail in any particular contract on delivering response maintenance. My view is the fault lay mainly on the side of Red Sky. The quality of the work was terrible. Their delays were terrible, you know, and worse than anywhere else in the province. Now, but that wasn't to the same extent now if you looked in other contracts that they have, but the relationship was not good there and their performance was not good.
And did you ever seek any explanation as to why it was particularly bad in one part of the contract and not as bad in other parts of the contract?
Well, toxic relationships might be one reason, but I do think Red Sky, by the way, overstressed themselves when they went for those 5 contracts, and the price to get those 5 contracts, and almost from the outset, you know, they were not going to be able to deliver across all 5.
But this is important because given the allegations were made about the relationship between the community and the housing executive and the firm in one particular part of Northern Ireland, you're saying that the performance was not as bad in other places where the housing executive did cooperate and where the tenants and the community cooperated with them.
Well, what I'm saying to you is Red Sky in West Belfast stuck out like a sore thumb in terms of its performance.
And you're also saying that there were particular problems with the community and there were particular problems with your staff.
The relationship between our staff and the contractor was not good, right? And that was operating on both sides. I don't want you, saying something I didn't say. What I am saying is that public representatives, community people, and tenants, were very vociferous about the service they were getting in West Belfast. And as far as I'm concerned, they were right for doing it because the contractor performance was very poor.
Can maybe just come on then to the amount of overpayment which was alleged. Initially, it was deemed to be 200,000. It was negotiated down to 26,000 or whatever. Was that done on an objective basis, or was it done on some other basis?
Colin might be able to help you a bit more than I can, but the starting point of this was of that overpayment of £150,000 was to do with kitchens, which the contractor installed. They were higher standard of kitchen. They'd been authorised by the local maintenance officers, which they shouldn't have done, and that immediately knocked off £150,000 worth of it. Now, the rest of the detail I wouldn't be all that terribly familiar with, but the big piece that was taken out of that was work that Red Sky did by putting in kitchens of a higher standard, which they believed they were authorised to do, and indeed it turned out the maintenance officers asked them to do it. So that took a substantial chunk of that away. The rest of it, Mr. Wilson, I really wouldn't be all that familiar with the detail.
So any suggestion that it was to do with who was negotiating the change rather than an objective assessment of what was actually owed, that would be totally incorrect.
And I mean, that was one of the points in the meeting that a meeting I had with Mr. Cushnan around, and I said the claim that went into a process which the organisation does. The substantial point he was making was, how can you actually be putting down an overcharge for kitchens worth £150,000 when your people locally authorised it?
Okay, so this was nothing. Had Santa Claus come and done the negotiations, you'd have still come to the same conclusion.
Based, by the way, I mean, at the end of the day, this claim was agreed by legal advice and by our contract claims people who are QSs and who have long years of experience, let me tell you, in dealing with contractors and their claims.
Okay. That was initially it wasn't reported to the board, and your explanation for that, Paddy, is that this was an operational matter which you wouldn't have expected to take to the board. Given your knowledge of the housing sector, I mean, what percentage of contracts would there be disputes about?
I mean, to some extent, the Egan Arena has taken that very adversarial relationship out of it, but you know, the construction industry is well known for claims and counterclaims. I mean, I can recall a contractor who at one stage, after he'd finished doing contracts for us, big contracts, come back in with a claim of £5 million. You know, I went to arbitration, all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, claims around contracts, the construction industry is famous for.
And would you have, is there some kind of criteria that the board has set as to which or what the threshold is for reporting disputed contracts to them?
Well, I mean, again, I'm thinking about the scheme of delegations here. I'm thinking around contract claims, right? The contracts manager, I think, had I would want this checked, but I'm not exactly sure whether these figures are still right or not, but he had a limit where he could settle a claim up to £50,000, provided the right legal advice and so forth. I have a feeling I might have been authorised to authorise a claim up to £100,000, but I mean, there were delegated limits set by the board. Now, whether those limits are, as I am quoting them now, but they're of that order.
But right, so that's where claims can be settled. But is there any kind of criteria given? Look, if a contract, if there's a difficulty with a contract, or there's issues with a contract, here are the kind of trigger things that would indicate that the board should be told about it.
No, and I mean, at the end of the day, the board were made aware of Red Sky when it became almost like a political issue, so it did, or rather, it was very much in the public eye. I mean, they would have been aware of it from then.
Okay. But
I mean, up until then, that's what it was. It was a dispute with a local contractor in a local district who was not performing properly, and about which there was lots of complaints coming in.
And it would be normal for that to be dealt with.
Yeah. I mean, you think the scale of our business, if we were putting everything like that to our board, the board would be meeting for about 3 or 4 days every month, so it would.
So there was nothing unusual, no attempt by officials to as has been suggested, to hide this.
No, absolutely not. I mean, totally wouldn't refute that allegation, totally.
See, just when it comes on the issue of the termination of the Red Sky contract, you advised the Deputy Director in March 2009 that because of contract administration, backlogs in payments and relationships which may have been relevant, that you considered that the Housing Executive's position in the matter of the termination was not robust. Is that correct?
I do not. In 2009? No. I was made it may well be you go back to the attempt being made to terminate the contract in 2007. By the way, right? December 2007. 2009. No, what we did in 2009 was that we began a process of setting the work. I think was commissioned in April 2009. Sorry. 2010, I think.
Paddy, hold on a second, Sammy. We have a letter here, I think, which was sent to Barney McGahan. So I think that's maybe the one you're referring to. Demand it, maybe.
I'm not. I mean, the dates don't ring a bell with me, so they don't.
Just so you have a copy in front of you. All right.
Signature there. So it does March 2009. Right. It's quite a long letter, this. Which I guess I was setting out. At this stage, I have a feeling why this letter would have emerged was because the Minister had been alerted about problems with Red Sky. I can't remember whether it was Margaret Ritchie or Alex Atwood, but around about that, which I assume is the reason why I was giving Barney an update.
And was the Minister pushing at that stage, because clearly from the tone of the letter, you're seeking to give guidance that the contract should not be terminated. Was the Minister pushing for the contract
No,
to be
absolutely,
terminated?
absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, I mean they were looking for just an update on what the position was. I mean, I'd like time, I guess, to read this letter before I commit any further comment to it. But no, I can't. You know, the minister.
All I'm asking is what provoked that letter, because it really is about refuting any case for termination on the basis. I'm not too sure where this paragraph is. On the basis of the legal opinion, the housing executive should demonstrate reasonable cause. Page 7. Reasonable cause for the termination of the contract, and then you go into reasons why you don't believe that there is a robust case for the termination of the contract. Now, all I'm asking is, what provoked that?
I would say, both Minister Ritchie and Minister Atwood were aware, because of complaints they were receiving about problems with Red Sky, so I assume I was asked a question for an update, which I have done. And I may have said at that stage, without reading the letter, we weren't in a position to take action. But what we subsequently did the following year was that we commissioned work by the Repairs Investigation Unit across Red Sky contracts, and we followed that up then with the commission of the ASM Harris to actually, in a sense, build a case which allowed us to take action against Red Sky and terminate the contract.
But you can't recall what it was provoked that letter.
I can only. My reading of this would be that. Who would read it? Was it the Minister Atwood or Minister Atwood? I can only imagine that he was hearing from his constituencies that there were problems with Red Sky, and he asked for, and he knew we were having problems, and I guess, and he was looking for an update.
Mr. Cuddy told us last week that he was very surprised that any minister should wish to get involved in discussion about procurement and contracts, etc. If this was a request from the minister at that stage to have the contract terminated, and you were then having to give reasons why you thought that shouldn't be the case, would you have taken the same view as Mr. Cuddy, that it would be unusual for a minister to want to dabble in the detail of a contract like this?
Well, I have a feeling now at this time as well there were significant numbers of questions being asked in the Assembly by local MLAs and so forth about Red Sky. I mean, the questions were coming fast and furious, and I presume it may well be what he was doing was looking for an update on the back of those questions. But I mean, again, it's a very factual letter. It's just simply describing a position. You know, which that wouldn't be the first time ministers have asked for that type of information, so it wouldn't be, you know.
It might be useful to check if we've got the letter from the housing executive that provoked that response and who it came from.
Letter to the housing executive.
Yeah, and as well, it may well have been verbal. I don't know, Mr. Wilson, but anyway. I mean, I guess it was because at that time significant questions were being asked by MLAs around Red Sky.
But had it been as a result of either a verbal or a written request for the housing executive to terminate the contract or to consider terminating the contract, would you have regarded that as an unusual and an unacceptable, in fact, to use Mr. Cuddy's term, totally unacceptable interference by a minister in public procurement and in a contract?
No, I wouldn't expect it. I mean, I don't know that the Minister was asking for us to terminate. I wouldn't expect a minister to be asking us to terminate a contract. I wouldn't. I say I'm not quite sure what the background of this was, but it was obviously a comprehensive brief.
And you would, had it been that, would you take the same view as Mr. Cuddy that was totally unacceptable?
This here is not unacceptable. I mean, this seems to be like giving information.
A request to have the contract terminated, would you regard, as Mr. Cuddy did last week, that is totally unacceptable interference by a minister?
I mean, I would have thought in anybody's view, I mean, a minister asking for the housing executive to terminate some contract wouldn't be acceptable. But I mean, having said that, I mean, Ministers, certainly devolved government ministers, have been pretty challenging compared to the old system here, where you dealt with a minister you might have saw twice a year. So I mean, they've a bigger interest and challenge a great deal more than would have been the case under the old system.
Just the last point, the part of the process of negotiating the amount that Red Sky owed the housing executive, as has been pointed out, the chairman of Red Sky was involved in those discussions. Do you find that, although he had been a member of the audit committee, but he had come off the audit committee, do you find anything unusual, or indeed from your memory of it, was there any advantage given to him by his membership of the audit committee when it came to the negotiation of the downward part of the debt?
I mean, my contact with Mr. Cushion would have been at one meeting, as far as I can recollect now, where he was making the point that this claim was excessive, of £200,000 when his firm had installed kitchens which they had been instructed to do and which they should be paid for. And I mean, it doesn't take a blind man to see that that shouldn't have happened.
But all I'm saying, Paddy, is would his former position as a member of the board and the audit committee have in any way impacted on the decision which you have said was given an objective?
Wouldn't have done no.
Okay.
Just on this issue of the kitchens, the £260,000, you've said twice that Red Sky were entitled to be paid because they were installing a higher standard kitchen.
Authorised by the local housing executive staff. Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, the evidence we heard a fortnight ago
Yes, I've read it.
from the head of the audit side of the housing
Yep.
executive was that the company, Red Sky, were charging for higher standard kitchens but fitting lower standard kitchens.
I read that evidence, by the way, and I mean, I'm not in any way whatsoever Raymond Kitson is a great guy. I just didn't understand where he was coming from.
Well,
That's something that needs clarified, I
Well,
think.
it was absolutely clear to us.
Yeah.
Because page 6 of that particular Hansard, we have two types of kitchen in our schedule of rates: post-formed, which is fairly expensive, elaborate type kitchen, and a standard kitchen. What we were getting in West Belfast, North Belfast, East Belfast and the like were standard kitchens. However, we were paying for post-form kitchens, which was substantially more expensive. And then he was asked by the chairperson, and he said, yes, we were getting the standard kitchen, not the more expensive, but we were paying for the more expensive one. And he went on to reiterate that.
I saw that, and to be quite honest, I mean, I found it strange. I'm not in any way.
Well, it's totally contradictory to what you're saying.
Absolutely is.
Now, who is right?
Well, my understanding of it is as I described to you, but I read Raymond's evidence, and I must say I didn't recognise it, but I wouldn't be in any way calling his integrity into question here.
Well, you both can't be right.
No, exactly.
Mr. Kitson, as I understand it, was saying to us, we were meant to be paying for standard kitchens, but we were paying for higher standard, which weren't installed. And the reason why that couldn't be pursued was someone in the housing executive had signed that off.
Well, my understanding is as I described to you until I read that evidence yesterday, and I must say it runs contrary to what I understood the
There's
position.
been no issue about 260,000 if you were getting higher standard kitchens.
So I found, I mean, it is contrary, and I understand the way you pick it up. It's something I think needs clarified.
And who can clarify that for us? Who can clarify?
Well, I think you just need to ask the housing executive. I mean, my understanding of it up until I read that evidence yesterday was that the higher standard kitchens had been installed and were paid for on the back of that, and Colin may be able to add a bit more light to that, you know, because I found that.
Well, I was going to suggest, Jim, because I already asked Claire there to take a note, because we do need to get clarification.
And I mean, by the way, one issue, I've not been misleading the committee here. My understanding up until I read that evidence yesterday was that the position as I described to you is why the case with the claim was settled.
Well, we're not accusing anybody here, yourself or anybody else, for that matter of misleading. What we're saying is we have two direct pieces of evidence, contradictory. to each other, so we'll have to clarify that.
And
other
I would
points?
I would also want to say I'm not calling in any way Raymond Kitson's evidence or integrity.
That's accepted.
Yeah.
A couple of other points. Who was or is Lawrence Mercer?
He was a district maintenance officer with the housing executive, right? Who, if you recall the audit office report, he was sacked in the year 2000,
Yeah.
right? Because allegedly he had taken holidays abroad or whatever it was with Red Sky. He was subsequently reinstated by an independent appeals committee, and I think possibly downgraded and moved. He subsequently ended up working, I think, for Red Sky as well. I don't know the man personally, but that's his history as far
That's
as
the gentleman. The allegation was he was taken on Concorde to Nashville.
Well, I've never. Well, it could be. Yes, you know more about that than I do. You know. But I mean, the allegation was he was taken abroad on holidays by Red Sky.
And were there other maintenance officers disciplined for accepting excessive hospitality?
I believe there is, and I look to my colleague behind who would probably add to
And that's
that.
excessive hospitality from Spectrum or
Aye.
Red Sky.
There was, I think, there was some maybe around Belfast 6, about 2006. I think there might have been some disciplinary action taken. But again, just to repeat this, we had to take this man back on the back of an independent appeals tribunal.
That's Mr. Mercer.
Yes.
He downgraded them.
Yeah, yeah.
But the others were also disciplined for excessive hospitality.
Yeah, but I think that might have been around 2006, and might have been some incident around the Odyssey or something
But
like
is
that.
it fair for the committee to infer that you can confirm that there were offers and acceptance of excessive hospitality from Red Sky to some of your employees?
Well, we took discipline action,
Yeah.
which would suggest yes. I'm not quite sure what the scale of the hospitality was around the Odyssey. I doubt it was sort of trips in Concorde, weren't
I think there's one suggestion of that. I asked you this. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy produced a report.
Yeah.
And they made an observation. First of all, they said that you acknowledged in an interview with them that you were a very close personal friend of Mr. McCaughey.
Yep.
And they went on to make the observation that that had clouded your judgment and that the degree of supervision and oversight of his division, the Housing and Regeneration Division, was extremely weak.
Wouldn't accept it and don't accept it, and I've told him I didn't accept it. I mean, Colin McCulley, yes, he was a friend of mine for 30 years. But at the end of the day,
Just inside the Housing Executive or outside?
and outside. But at the end of the day, he had to produce his business plan for the division. He had to produce the targets for his division. He was monitored in exactly the same way as any other director.
Well, have you any idea how
No, but I have.
this Chartered Institute could reach the view
Yeah.
that your judgment was clouded by your friendship and that
I-
you let him off light in terms of supervision?
Well, I don't know how they come to that conclusion. But it's nonsense.
It's a pretty damning conclusion, isn't it?
No. If you don't accept it, it's not true. You know, people can come to a view, but it's not necessarily based on
But
fact.
they carried out an investigation.
You know, it's not necessarily based on fact.
So did they make it up?
Well, I'm telling you, I'm refuting it. You know, I'm not quite sure what the relevance of it is to this particular inquiry.
Just going to make a point there, Jim. We're, you know, it's probably straying into something which is not the subject of the inquiry. I mean, obviously letting.
I thought
West-
Housing
West-
Executive Oversight was part of the inquiry.
Yeah, it is. I was just going to say there. I mean, obviously we have to let some of these lines of questions go to see where they're getting to, and have to make a judgment at some point.
Okay.
Straying.
Okay, thanks.
I have you down, sure. Okay, so do you finish your Jim?
Yes.
Okay. Fry, you wanted him for a point?
Sure, and it was just one of the questions that Sammy asked in relation, I think, to what Stuart Cuddy said last week in relation to the termination of the contract. But I thought that the whole debate around what Stuart Cuddy was saying is that he was being asked to reinstate the contract, not terminate it.
That's
No,
that was a different line, yeah. Some of you were asking about the
Yeah,
previous
I
one.
mean, there was clearly a request of some sort about. I was really trying to get to the point as to whether or not Mr. Cuddy seemed to be quite indignant that any minister should ask questions about a contract which is live, and since there appeared to be an earlier question about the contract, only in this case, rather than extend the contract, it was a case of terminating it. I just wanted to see whether, first of all, ministers did, on a regular basis, ask about controversial contracts, whether all housing executive officials took the view that such interference was unacceptable, and what the background to this particular request had been.
We did say that we would try to get the correspondence. We dealt with that earlier on when Paddy McIntyre has been asked the questions as to what sparked that letter which he had sent, setting it de facto record, as he said it was. Just the record, the Minister of Defence was Margaret Ritchie, just at that time, October 2009. That's just because people were querying earlier on.
Could I just one last question for Paddy, just in relation to the last question? Do you find that, first of all, it's surprising that the question has to be asked as to how that conclusion was reached, if there was clear evidence that the conclusion was based on fact?
Which question is the last question?
The last question. Would it not substantiate, perhaps, the point which you were trying to make, that people can have an opinion, but if they can't substantiate that opinion, then it really isn't relevant to this inquiry?
Well, that's my view.
Right.
And I mean, the other question is that there are lots of friendships occur inside and outside an organisation. Would it be regarded as unusual for people in the housing executive to be friends outside work as well as inside?
Oh, and I have loads of other friends outside work from my days in the housing executive who I still meet.
Okay, Stuart.
Can I just maybe just follow through? And that wasn't actually my intended question. I've heard what both of you have said in respect of that relationship, but I have to ask a question. Why would a professional body make that comment? They wouldn't normally comment on people's personal relationships if it wasn't relevant to whatever their inquiry was. It seems to me, I appreciate you can dismiss the comment, but why do you think a professional body conducting an inquiry would want to come to that view?
Well, you better ask them why they might come to that view.
Perhaps we should.
And you should do, because I mean, that, by the way, I had never come across that until 2 years after the event.
Okay. Can I take you back to Mr. Kitson's evidence? And you helpfully told us that when you read it yesterday, you felt it was completely at odds with what you
Absolutely,
told us.
yes. Yeah.
Why didn't you tell us that at the beginning in giving it this morning? Why didn't you say to us, by the way, I'm going to tell you something that's very different from what you've already read?
Well, I should have done, and I wasn't intending to conceal it, but I mean, I read the stuff yesterday for the first time. I have to say, it is contrary to what my belief was up until I read that.
Would that be...
And by the way, also, by the way, it's Colm's belief as well up until we read that yesterday.
And was it also your belief? Was that a belief formed when you were the operational chief executive of the housing executive?
Yeah, it was.
So you have at least one other person who had a completely different understanding of a very serious situation from you inside the organisation at the same time when you were operationally functional.
It may be that I am wrong, by the way. I mean, because Raymond Kitson and I wouldn't at all question his integrity. But my understanding of it up until I read that was the positions I have stated to the committee.
Can I just ask one question based on that, Paddy? When you were looking at what was owed and what wasn't owed, and it was submitted that, look, we supplied kitchens of a higher standard than what had been specified in the contract, but we did that at the request of the housing executive. Presumably the housing executive official, Mr. Kitson, who would have been knowledgeable in these matters, would have been asked the question at that time. Have you any recollection that he refuted that the question, that the appropriate kitchens had been supplied at that stage?
I'm totally, I mean, it's news to me that. So it is, I wouldn't have been. I actually wasn't, I mean, at the end of the day, I wasn't deeply involved in any way in that negotiation.
Would he have been, I mean, I don't know how this works, but if somebody came in and said, no, those kitchens were better than what had been in the contract, but we did it at the request of the housing executive, presumably somebody would have checked that before agreeing the figure, would they?
I would have thought so as part of the negotiation over the claim.
So Mr. Kitson would have had an opportunity at that
Well,
stage.
whether Raymond was involved in that at that stage or not, I'm not quite sure.
Can I give you Mr. Kitson's?
Sure, if I could just maybe just draw people's attention to we have a copy here of an RIU interim investigation report that's dated 2nd of June 2009. It would seem to indicate that what Paddy McIntyre is saying is his record will be accurate, but it's in tab 1. But what I would suggest, I mean, obviously it's been raised, and we're now getting into 3 or 4 different references and material, so we've already agreed and we're going to get clarification. Could I suggest, that we just, I'm not saying park this, because people have explored and Stuart has the floor there, but it might be useful just because we're now exchanging different versions of information that we deal with Stuart as much as you want to hear, of course, but bear in mind that we better seek formal
All I wish to do, and it's not my judgment at the end of the day, Chair, it is what Mr. Kitson placed on the record in his opening words, where I was involved in the negotiations.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
He's claiming that he was.
If he's seen that, by the way, I wouldn't doubt that.
Can I take you back then to the employee who was disciplined, dismissed and then reinstated? You've made a couple of references to the fact that you had to take him back. Is there any significance in the scale of things and the fact that you're telling us that you had to
Well, I
take
think
him
we'd
back?
rather not have taken him back.
Sorry?
We'd rather not have had to have taken him back, but I mean, he won an independent appeal, and was the advice or the recommendation of the independent appeal panel was, you've got to take him back.
Was that due to administrative failures on your HR side in respect of how the matter was handled, or was it to do with the substance of the actual misdemeanour?
Again, I wouldn't have. I mean, it's way back in 2000. I wouldn't really have any detailed knowledge of it. But I mean,
it has potentially a material aspect to it. Either it was because you administratively had poorly handled the disciplinary procedure, or it was because that the penalty of dismissal was deemed to be inconsistent with the level of offence committed.
Again, I don't know why the appeal panel came to that conclusion. I'm sure it's in the record somewhere, but I would have thought if the allegations that he had been taken at that level of hospitality were true, he should never have been back in the door of the Housing Executive.
In which case?
Which could suggest there was some failure on how we presented our case or whatever. I don't know, to be quite honest, Mr. Dixon.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure, thank you for that. Paddy, can I mean, in your own submission to us, you've actually pointed out that is that right? Actual commentary from yourself. I think in paragraph 2 or section 2, where you say, I'm just quoting from the first bullet point in 2. So really the context of Red Sky and our track record, you say that Red Sky and its various forms have carried out work for the Housing Executive for a number of years. Over these years have presented a number of management and performance difficulties. There's a pattern, you see, for a lot of the members here, there's a kind of picture that, notwithstanding a lot of those difficulties, they've persisted for years. And I know Colin in his submission, which we'll discuss shortly, points to a lot of measures which have been put in place to try to correct these problems. But clearly these problems persisted over a number of years. And I think what we're trying to establish in our minds, how was that allowed to happen? Why did it happen? And it's just, I know you're saying in hindsight you might have different views and things, but it'd be interesting to hear your view of it, because it also does relate to the toxic relationship as you described it. I mean, I find it a bit unusual that, with all due respect for your own position, when someone's saying it's a toxic relationship and then there's allegations of sectarianism, which I take that to mean that somebody in the West Belfast Housing Executive District was a Catholic imposing a biased approach to Red Sky. That's what has been said in everybody's submissions here, or suggested at least. I think it's better to say it openly than hide around it. Clearly it was a very important issue. It was a pressing issue. Can you give us any kind of a bit of a clarity on that? Or, I mean, obviously it was a toxic relationship. There was clearly inspections regime been enhanced and so on, according to the evidence that we've received. A lot of complaints, which you've said, were brought by a range of people, including your own officials. So we're trying to work out in our mind, well, why was that issue allowed to continue on for years, where there were problems with performance, for example, and other management problems?
Well, as I said earlier, over the years we did try to take steps. First of all, to terminate. Well, earlier, by the way, they stopped Red Sky from tendering for further contracts, 5 of which they got in 2007. The legal advice was that we could not do that, despite the fact we knew performance had not been good in previous contracts over a period of time. The second thing is that we did try to terminate the contract in 2007, and again, on the back of legal advice, we were unable to do so. Which really leads us back, I guess, into the middle of early part of 2009, early part of 2010, which is when we decided we wanted to collect solid evidence of their performance across all of their contracts, and we asked the RAU to carry out that work. I took a view, along with the chair of the audit committee, that given our difficulty in enforcing action against Red Sky previously, we should actually get forensic accountants in to have a look at it, and that was where ASM Harworth came in, and that put us in a position where the evidence was such that we had a strong case to terminate the contract. Now, that happened after I left, but I'm familiar with the comings and goings of all of that. I'm not trying to say that we were restricted. Absolutely, we probably could have managed the situation better ourselves, but at the end of the day, the couple of times we did try to take action, legally we couldn't do it. We also undermined our own position from time to time as well. One way or another, those kitchen, that was it. That actually, in a sense, about trying to take action about that, we had undermined our position by our own actions there, or inaction.
Okay, Paddy, thank you. We have no other members indicating to speak. But is there any, before we wind up this session, we will get clarity around that issue that you just last referred to. Are there any further comments you want to make? Because obviously the committee will be in an ongoing way assessing all the evidence that we've heard. You may want to get further information, or even maybe talk to a number of individual witnesses in the future. Could I suggest that invitation will be also open to yourself if you want to come back to this committee and add to anything that's been said already, or clear anything up that you subsequently think about?
I'd be particularly keen.
Any comments you want to make this morning before we finish?
I presume, Chairman, will the position be that there will be a draft report produced? Will people who have given evidence have an opportunity to have a look at it?
Well, the committee will do a report. Up until now, we had decided that if there were adverse findings against someone, then they would receive a copy.
That's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
But I thank you very much. And as I said, the invitation to yourself to come back to us is open. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, moving on to the next session. We have Colin McCauley. Colin, you're very welcome. Thank you. Again, thank you for being here this morning and providing us with the paper. And just for members' information, that paper's on page 131 of your pack. Okay. And probably some of the evidence, the questions will probably be covered some of the similar ground, I presume. Okay, members. Colin McCann.
Sure. Colin, welcome this morning inquiry. In the briefing that you provided this morning, you spoke of that in 2006 that there was that you had raised concerns about a contract under Spectrum Red Sky, and I think about that just were advised in legal advice that just weren't that just couldn't. Could see the Spectrum. Could you explain who Spectrum were? What the difficulties you had with the contract, where the contract was based, and whether there was any concerns raised by local politicians, the local community, or others in the.
Spectrum was one of the predecessors of the new entity Red Sky. There were 3 companies pulled together. Spectrum's main areas of operation prior to the existence of Red Sky was East Belfast and the Shankill. Its performance actually in East Belfast wasn't too bad, but on occasions its performance in the Shankill Road was left a lot to be desired. And on a number of occasions I was drawn into detailed discussions with them about their performance, and had to deal with it on a number of occasions, and had to recover overpayments on a number of occasions. Not quite as big or as awful, to use a general term, as later transpired. But yeah, there were some difficulties. I have to say, it wasn't all bad. They were an extraordinarily good company in cases of emergencies, which were quite common. And on those occasions, actually, they outperformed most other contractors. But on the day-to-day business which we were dealing with and our tenants, yeah, they left a fair bit to be desired, the old company Spectrum. And our fear was that was effectively going to get drawn into the new company. Hence the desire to block them effectively from tendering. But I think the committee's also got evidence from CPD to explain the legal basis of that. You simply cannot stop a company from bidding on the basis of past performance.
And when they were operating in the Shankill and East Belfast, obviously, was it your own officers who brought the attention of maybe poor quality work in the likes of the Shankill? Was it local politicians? Was it local community representatives that would have raised?
It was both. It was both staff and the community reps and the political representatives, yeah. Particularly the community representatives. I mean, there was a huge amount of works going on around the Shankill at the time, and it bubbled up there through the community sector fairly extensively.
And I say, my memory serves me right in that there was some very, very serious concerns raised at the time within the Shankill about the quality of work and about the by Spectrum.
I think that's fair enough, but it's like all contractors, they peak and they trough in terms of their performance. You seldom get a contractor who has steady line performance. But the trouble with Spectrum was its peaks and its troughs are higher and lower than anybody else's. Yeah, so yeah, they were a problem in the Shankill at various stages, yeah.
But at the same time, you wouldn't accuse it of being sectarian?
No, the sectarian issue was something which was raised subsequently on 2 occasions.
Talking about in the Shankill, because
on the Shankill,
Councillor Wilson seems to indicate here this morning that all the complaints that were coming from West Belfast, whether it was from the likes of me as an elected representative or our elected representatives, community representatives, about the pure work that was carried out by Red Sky. That there seemed to be an indication of sectarianism, but the same level, the same pure work happened before under the former name of Spectrum in the Shankill area.
Yeah, on occasion. But the sectarian issue was raised with me on 2 different occasions around the relationship between the West Belfast office and the new Red Sky.
And did you carry an investigation, or have anybody carried an investigation into that?
Well, what actually happened was when they won the new tranche of contracts, which included, which was actually a huge amount of work, its business effectively increased by a factor of 200%, 250%. Which one was West Belfast? There were serious problems emerged. I, during my normal visits to the district offices, got a briefing from West Belfast Maintenance Department about the problems. But I also, in due course, had this view expressed by Red Sky that effectively what was happening, that, unlike all other districts, it was sectarianism which was behind or some mild form of sectarianism, whatever way you would want to call it. Is there such a thing as mild? Maybe not. That was behind it. So what I decided to do was to really take one stand back, call in the RIU, the Repairs Inspection Unit, and get them to investigate the basis of the overall complaints about the performance of Red Sky. And the results of the RIU clearly showed it was an outright issue of performance. And what actually happened, in my view, is having grown by 250%, Red Sky couldn't get the skilled labour. Remember, this time Northern Ireland's going through the highest rate of new build probably post the Second World War. All the skilled labour was in the new build sector. They really couldn't get the skilled labour to perform on all the contracts. So they weren't committing enough resource to fulfil the terms of the contract. And on that basis alone, I terminated the contract. Well, after asking them, would they kindly like to withdraw on the basis that they didn't have the capacity, but they declined that offer, and that was one area in which the sectarian issue was raised. It was raised later with me, after we'd reinstated them, and yet there were still obvious questions around their performance. Two things happened. One, verbally, face-to-face at a meeting, one of the officers said that a particular maintenance officer, we've got to make it clear, not the district manager. The district manager was totally irrelevant to the situation in terms of this issue around sectarianism. That one particular maintenance officer, whom I don't wish to name today, but I know who he was, that this particular maintenance officer was abusive, was deliberately trying to undermine them. And I told Red Sky that if I discovered that to be the case, I would move the officer and discipline him. Subsequently, they put that in writing. Now, somehow, somewhere, somebody has decided to correlate the letter sent to me saying this person is still creating problems for us, and what are you going to do about it? You know, you said you'd move them, with a move by a district manager a year later. I do not know how that happened or why that correlation has taken place. But it was a specific maintenance officer. I had the matter. The letter in question was referred to the Director of Personnel and to my Assistant Director for investigation. A full investigation took place, including the Red Sky official had told me one other staff member was present when the abuse and some of these other issues took place. The other officer was interviewed. No evidence could come forth to the fact that the officer was behaving inappropriately. I advised verbally Red Sky of that. Please don't ask me when. I can't honestly remember when, but I know they were told. But what did transpire was no formal letter of response was ever issued, even though one was drafted, and I cannot provide any explanation to the committee as to why that happened. I certainly wish it hadn't happened, that the letter had been issued. So there was, in both instances of sectarian calls, in my view, proper investigation, one by the RIU and one by personnel stroke my assistant director. And
I found there was no reason for the allegations to be made.
well, all I'm saying is we could not find any evidence.
The findings from both organisations.
Well, we could not find any evidence to support the allegation.
You talked about the termination of I think it was a word of the Red Sky contract, and if at the time a minister had come to you and says that you wanted to reinstate the contract, and I don't know under what circumstances it was reinstated at that time, but if a minister came to you and asked you to reinstate it, would you have believed that that was undue pressure from a minister interfering in the normal contractual workings of the housing executive?
Yeah, I could see no reason why, if the evidence was there to show poor performance, why anyone would wish to extend a contract, other than to find time to clear staffing issues. This was a major employer in the city. I always had due concern for whatever we did with Red Sky. We had to be concerned with their employees and the impact on that local bit of the economy that it would have. And therefore, somebody said to me about contracts and managing them to a proper conclusion. I would have to take account of the fact that I would have to manage it to honour commitments to the staff of that organisation and to make sure that they were not, that they didn't get a bad deal out of it because of mismanagement by staff. Or by managers.
There would have been a legal requirement on you to do that. It would be an option that would have to be done.
It would have to be done, but what I'm saying is you'd need to take the proper time to do it in. That may not necessarily be 1 month. It might be 6 months to put Tupi and all the other things into effect. In other words, I wouldn't have been rushing in. Mind you could say maybe we should have rushed in a few other times to terminate it. But it should have due regard to staff, is in summary what I'm really saying.
Okay, Jim.
When Pauline Gazzard wrote to you She wrote to you, isn't that right?
Yes.
Yes. Was that on foot of discussions there'd been, or did that letter come out of the blue?
No, there had been continuous discussions at this stage. This was at the stage where they were going through the transition in terms of completing their management plan, improvement plan, and we would have continuous meetings with them. And at one of the meetings, the issue was raised about a particular officer.
Well, the letter, in fact, it seems to go wider than that. It talks about certain personalities, more than one person, obviously, who remain working in the West Belfast office, and they're looking for appropriate actions.
Well, initially she was heading out with a broad brush, saying that maybe the whole office was sectarian, but then she focused in on one particular officer. So
but not in this letter.
No,
Was there a follow-up to this letter? Was there a further meeting then?
No. Well, in terms of...
Well, she wrote to you, there'd been discussions, then she wrote to you talking about certain personalities, and now you're telling us she focused in on one individual. Yes. When did the focusing on one individual occur?
Well, it was certainly prior to the issue of that letter, because prior to the issue of that letter, the focus was on one particular officer with me, verbally.
Focus of this letter is on more than one officer.
Yeah, I will accept that, but it was not. I don't know why she decided to broaden it again, because the issue had been, as far as I am concerned, the issue then concerned.
Would you agree it was quite an audacious letter for a contractor to write to their employer, saying we don't like some of your staff, we want appropriate action?
It is quite desperate. I think maybe Red Sky were a little desperate at that stage in any event. They really had to fulfil the improvement plan to stay, to maintain.
They seemed to want to call the shots within the housing executive.
Well, I don't think the evidence supports Red Sky ever called any shots.
They said wanted to.
They may have wished to, but that was not the case. They were under continuous scrutiny.
Whenever Mr. Cushnahan wrote, talking about threatening to wash dirty linen in public, now that was to your colleague, but you were aware of that letter?
Oh, yes.
At that point, did you say to some staff that Red Sky must have something on us, or has something on us?
I don't recall a statement to that effect.
To that effect?
No.
Well, were you aware of anything that Red Sky might have had that it wouldn't be in the interests of the housing executive for it to become public knowledge?
No, nothing more than the normal results of all the inspections, which castigated some of our staff as much as it castigated Red Sky and its performance.
It's one of the reasons you couldn't sometimes recover money was because your own staff hadn't covered themselves in glory. Isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I acknowledge that throughout. That part of the problem here was most of the staff were excellent, but on the 3 occasions that I had a detailed investigation into Red Sky, disappointingly, despite all our best efforts, this issue still percolated to the top, which was some individual staff didn't perform to the standards required, and that to some extent was letting Red Sky off the hook.
And on the 260,000 reduced to 20,000 figure, you took the decision to sign that off, is that right?
Yes, it was in my delegated area of responsibility.
Had you asked Mr. Cushnan to become involved?
I don't honestly recall, but I could say this, I might have, but I don't recall who.
Why might you?
On the basis that our dealings with some of the other members of Red Sky were circular and were not really as conducive to resolving some of the issues as they might have been. But I don't honestly recall whether it was myself or even my assistant director or any of the other staff involved.
And you thought it appropriate, given his the issues that the PAC has since adversely commented upon, you thought it appropriate to involve him?
Yes, and I still do. I mean, I can think of hundreds of people who were private individuals, ex-public servants, who subsequently worked even for the firms as full-time employees that they would have had previous dealings with because they worked for IDB or whatever. I mean, I really... I mean, the issue here was nothing to do with his previous role in the housing executive. The issue here was how much were we owed and how much was he going to pay us?
On the issue of how much we were owed, you've heard the discussion this morning about whether it was actually the installing of standard kitchens and the charging for higher standard kitchens which was the problem, or whether higher standard kitchens were actually installed. And you know what Mr. Kitson told us?
Yeah. By the way, Raymond was party to the 6 meetings, I think 6 meetings I would have had in dealing with that particular overpay. I'm struggling here to find an analogy for the committee to understand it. And I think the best I could do is to say, if you had 2 cars, both with exactly the same engine, by way of output, etc., and one was encased in a Lada and the other one was encased in a Ferrari, they both meet the standard, they both have the same output, but they're both fundamentally different products. The product which Red Sky gave us was excitedly better than anything we had ever installed before, and as Paddy remarked, led me to demand a review of our kitchen standards. There was one standard. I think Raymond says there was 2. There was one standard and 2 prices. You know, all you had to do was get above the standard. You get paid.
So Mr. Kitson has misled this committee in telling us that the issue was that you were only paying for standard kitchens, that you were paying for higher standard kitchens but only getting standard kitchens.
I would never suggested Raymond would.
But that's what he told us.
Well, let me explain this. If to meet our standard, all you need to do is to put a wooden handle on the kitchen door. What Red Sky put on was a beautiful steel shaker-shaped handle, which the tenants adored.
So you are confirming to us that it was a higher standard kitchen that was installed than what the contract was for, and that is what was then being paid for.
I would say it was of a higher quality. The materials used may not have been so, but the quality of the design and what was better.
But Mr. Kitson told us there's a standard kitchen, there's a post-form kitchen. Do you recognise that terminology?
Oh, yes.
Right. What was installed at West Belfast? Standard kitchen or post-form kitchen?
Neither. Something different. Something which was...
Another variety.
Yes, something which wasn't a standard, which was different, but it wasn't post-form. 6 months later, after the review of the kitchens, everything was shifted. The standard was up to post-form only.
Let me ask you, were you billed for standard or post-formed kitchens?
The local manager authorised the pricing at post-formed on the basis of what Red Sky was providing.
But it wasn't post-formed that was provided?
No. Well, there are many forms.
But it was post-formed that was paid for?
Yeah.
So there was a loss to the housing executive even in that scenario, was there?
You could argue that, yeah. How much? You could argue, yeah.
So what we have is Mr. Kitson saying, pretty clear cut, we got standard kitchens, we paid for post-form kitchens. Mr. McIntyre telling us, no, we got post-form kitchens, that's what we paid for. And you telling us, well, in fact, it's something in between. We didn't get post-form kitchens, but we got standard kitchen with knobs on it.
Of a higher quality design, yes, and some components, yeah.
You understand that the committee might be baffled how we're getting 3 different versions of this matter?
Oh yes, I fully understand it.
Is that a reflection of a turmoil within the housing executive?
No, I think it was just a
What is it a
reflection.
reflection
A
of?
reflection of a particular set of circumstances that happened in a particular district office at a particular time, and which was inspected and then managed out of the system through a review of standards.
All sounds pretty shambolic, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly wasn't helpful to our relationship with Red Sky and to the management of Red Sky, and that's why the officer who authorised that was subsequently barred from any operational management.
So what had he done wrong?
He had not sought central clearance on the standard that he was adopting.
He was paying for a higher standard than he got.
Up to a point, yeah. But what he should have done was he had a new product that he was being offered. He should have got clearance from headquarters for the acceptance of that product.
I must say I'm more confused than ever about this. I want to ask you one other thing. Mr. McVeigh, the head of the audit side, gave us evidence in which he said that, much to his annoyance, you altered a report, the RIU initial draft report. He told us, in my view, the changes made obscured the clear analysis that had come out of RIU's initial draft, which indicated there was some substance to the whistleblower's allegations. He's saying you sanitised it, you toned it down.
Well, what I demanded of the RIU was absolute precision in the report, in that we had been through a series of previous reports where we ended out with a figure much less than we started. Now, that was through a process review. And secondly, to make it totally clear what the financial impact of those results were. Now, if we look at the two drafts, exactly the same data is in both, except in one and not the other, you get a very clear picture of what the financial impact is. And I mean, I'm sure the committee has access to both those, or can have access to both those drafts. Yep. And I will put it to the committee. If you look at both, I mean, the committee members themselves can judge whether anything cloudy has been introduced into the analysis.
Well, what do you say to what Mr. McVeigh told us? You've read it, I presume.
I think it's his opinion. My opinion is...
Well, his opinion is very clear that you sanitised it.
We said sanitised, but...
Well, I'm paraphrasing.
Well, I changed it to make it a better report, clearer report, something which could be used against Red Sky and which was comparative and relative as opposed to absolute.
But was Wes critical of Red Sky?
No, my view is it shows you consistently that Red Sky were underperforming on a relative basis and on a comparative basis with other contractors. None of that comparative information was in the first draft.
I want to give you the opportunity to comment on what the Chartered Institute said about the close relationship that Mr. McIntyre had with you, clouding his judgment and giving you a lot of leeway in how you ran the department. Any comments on that?
I really don't accept that. I mean, I've been sent on many management courses, but I've never seen friendship as one of the factors in efficiency and effectiveness of individual officers, to be honest. I find it hard. I struggle to accept what's said there. I don't know the motivation or the briefing that went on behind the construction of such a statement. I was subject to the same controls as all others. I had to produce business plans. All my performance had to be reported, not simply to the Chief Executive, but to the board as well, every month, how every component of my bit of the business was performing.
Well, this is a professional body, the CIF, the CIPFA report. It comes from a professional body, doesn't it? Who one would assume should have no axe to grind about these matters. You think they have?
I don't know. I don't know who briefed them.
But they say that the division headed by you appears to be operating with minimum oversight and ineffective controls.
I simply don't accept
The
it.
picture it paints is that you and your friend, Mr. McIntyre, gave you a lot of latitude, that maybe that wasn't given to others, and that you could run that department as you please.
My latitude was determined by the board and all the other arrangements put in place via the board as to what was my delegated authority.
Okay, so just in terms of your subservience to the board, did you take Pauline Gazzard's letter to the board?
No, I had no.
Why not?
I viewed it as a purely an operational matter. One
That's a
substantive.
great phrase, an operational matter. But this was a contractor wanting to dictate terms about staffing within the an office of the executive.
Well, I
That was
viewed,
more than an operational matter, was it?
no, I viewed such matters as that's why they paid me, to manage problems like that away instead of taking every such issue to the board, which was managing a huge multi-million-pound business with.
So you thought it was right to conceal that from the board
I thought it was right not to present it to the board
and from the audit committee?
and not to present it to the audit committee. Yes.
Was that because it would raise too many awkward questions?
No.
Thank you.
Colin, I'm going to just point out that, I mean, it's just, again, that what I'm going to advise is that the net effect of the changes actually minimise the levels of overpayment. That's what's been suggested by the evidence that we got. It's actually what suggested was said at the evidence last week. The changes that you had made to the draft minimise the levels of overpayment. I'm just putting it on the record for you because that's, sometimes we skirt around things. We just need to say it so that you can have an opportunity to respond. But you were saying that you were interested in relatively comparative and.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you look at one of the key figures, the key figure here is what percentage of the orders inspected had an overpayment. In financial terms, never mind it's 25% quoted in one of them against one of the districts. What does that mean in financial terms? And the answer was in financial terms, 4%. There's no point in me going to Red Sky saying 25% of your orders are being overpaid, when the actual answer is 4% of your orders are being overpaid.
Okay, no, fair enough. Thank you for that. Gregory?
Yeah, I want to start with one of the questions you answered to Fra McCann at the beginning of your evidence. You talked about Spectrum, predecessor of Red Sky, and you talked about the sort of peaks and troughs of performance. Was that specifically to do with Spectrum, or did that peak and trough happen with Red Sky?
Yeah, it happened with Red Sky to some extent as well. There was a period where, I mean, if you give them marks out of 10, okay, early on in the contract, give them 4. They rose to about 7, then they fell back to 6. So they went downhill. There was a bit of a parabola going on. They were up and down. Right. So yeah, okay. fairly dramatic. Yeah. And I put that down to the whole issue around labour and the availability of labour at this time in Northern Ireland. Right. They just couldn't get the people to do the job.
Right. And you had said that sort of one of their peaks was more in terms of emergency work.
Oh yes.
Right. And was that applicable to Red Sky as well as Spectrum as well?
Absolutely. Actually, at the time of the floods in Belfast, they were extraordinary.
Right. Extraordinarily
good.
Right.
Yes. But
and then, how many firms would have been involved during your time in response maintenance contracts then, in addition to Red Sky? If we leave Spectrum out in timeline terms, but in the Red Sky terms.
Is the timeline post-Egan? Or you think of pre-Egan? Or
when did Egan?
I'd say about, really 2004 would have been the threshold.
Post that.
Post that, there would only been about 28, 30.
Right.
Yeah.
Say 30 in round terms.
Yeah.
And then how would they, I'm interested in this peak and trough performance. The other companies, would there have been less volatility with them? Is that what singled out Red Sky for attention?
Yeah, yeah. No contractor can go in a straight line because he gains and loses skilled labour.
Yeah.
But you expect the level of volatility to be manageable. In Red Sky's case, it proved not to be.
Right. But of the other firms, the other 28 or 29 firms, had they poor performances as well as good performances, just not as extreme as Red Sky, or is that, am I being accurately depicting what the picture was?
Yes, there would have been times when we would have received complaints about some of the other contractors, yes. But again, it would have been, for the most part, short-lived.
Okay.
And there would usually be a good reason.
Right, okay. Now, the reason I'm going to find that route is we've got a copy of the letter that the BBC sent to you June last year. Of course, we sometimes forget the reason all this is going on is because of the BBC.
Yeah.
They're the reason we're here.
Yep.
They're the reason why we've spent the last 14 months examining this. But they never come and sit where you are. We've tried to get them, and they seem to be quite content. They've kicked up a storm and are away in the smoke now. But in the letter of the 13th of June to you, they posed 13 questions. And I've looked through them, and I don't see any of them alluding to any of the other 29 firms.
Yes.
Did they raise any of the other firms with you, other than Red Sky?
So to the best of my knowledge, never anything raised about the, I could be wrong here, but to the best of my recollection, there's never anything raised about other.
Okay. But you've already said that some of the other firms had problem issues, maybe not as extreme in volatility terms, either as good or as bad. But what were they?
Yep.
Had they bad times as well as good?
Yeah, but
The other firm.
that's another reason why I amended the audit report, to make it all relative and comparative. There's no point in isolating just Red Sky if we should have been terminating another dozen contracts, you know. So, yeah, they would have, but they weren't of the scale and magnitude that we were experiencing with Red Sky.
Right. But none of the 13 questions alluded to any of the other firms of the letter from the BBC to you?
To the best of my recollection, yeah.
Right. The chairman had alluded, you know, that to get right down to the basics of it, you know, in terms of this sectarian undertone, that you know, in terms of a Protestant Catholic thing. So maybe if we did that in relation to the overall issue, then just so we're absolutely clear and there's nobody dodging the column, as it were. I've put it to a number of people, senior people in the Housing Executive, that there was an underlying problem with the Housing Executive's composition of its workforce for 20-odd years. And during the period of time that we're talking about, post-Egan, the recruitment into the Housing Executive of Protestants was worse than the recruitment of Catholics into the police, that necessitated a law change to get a 50-50 recruitment balance. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Right. So percentage-wise, there were fewer Protestants being recruited into the Housing Executive than there were Catholics into the police.
Well, can I leap forward and say, but you really do need to break that down. Those figures wouldn't apply to technical staff. It'd probably be the opposite for technical staff. That in the technical professions, there would be a higher percentage of Protestant to Catholic.
Yeah.
Traditionally, for example, most of the architects, most of the QSs would have been Protestant. Now, I don't want to mislead. By the end of the period in question, while that had been the case, I suspect things had started to even out of that. But it depended on which bit of the organisation you worked. Clerical end, dominated by Catholics. Technical end, at one stage, dominated by Protestants. But gradually, the two, thankfully, changing.
Yeah, but the reason why I raise that is the overall organisation had a recruitment practice over that period of time that gave a particular view to the organisation, irrespective of how various sections of it were viewed. But the organisation as a whole had a perception of having a difficulty in recruiting sufficient numbers from the Protestant community.
Yeah.
At the same time as a company, Red Sky,
Yeah.
who were viewed by most people as having a predominantly Protestant workforce, were working amongst other areas in a predominantly Catholic area. Would that be right?
Yeah, we were, especially in my division, proactively seeking to recruit more Protestants. Yeah,
Yes.
especially in my division.
Yeah, but the bigger picture here, I'm saying to you, is there was an issue of sectarian undertow, right?
Yes.
By a company that was perceived to be predominantly Protestant working in a predominantly Catholic area. Did you or anyone else, to your knowledge, once that allegation and assertion had been made, then say anything like, we better be exceptionally careful here because we are aware of how we as a company, as an institution, are perceived in the wider context of Northern?
That would be continually run through your mind as a member of a public organisation like the Housing Executive, to be aware of that sort of situation being escalated into a major public issue, which it wasn't in this case, but yeah, it would always be in the back of your mind. I mean, the history of the Housing Executive was one of never had there been a case of discrimination brought and held against us, and that was always the first thing you told a new member of staff. You must never do anything which would lead the organisation in a position where it was found guilty of some form of sectarian or discrimination.
Would that advice that's offered to staff have been offered to the people that were the staff members who were at the centre of the allegation by Red Sky?
They would have known that. It would have been deeply instilled in them. Yeah, as part of their full psyche is your Housing Executive, your neutral. Yeah.
Okay, Greg, thank you for that. I mean, I think we are making a huge leap from an allegation of sectarian motivation, which resulted in complaints against Red Sky, to the workforce compensation and so on. But I mean, it's been urged and put on the table, and perhaps that's the best way to deal with it. So it's been opened up, and we're not going
Better to be
down that road
precise,
any-
Chairman.
Pardon?
Better to be precise.
No, I think it's important people to spit it out and something as it said, but I will rule when appropriate that an line will not be continued. So I'm going to make that clear. Mickey, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. I have to say there seems to be a fixation about sectarianism. I fortunately live in an area where we're not quite so fixated. It just seems to me that I had never heard of Red Sky till I came here. So there doesn't seem to be that perception. Yeah, probably am lucky from what I've heard.
Particular questions.
The point that I was making is Gregory seems to be implying that there's this perception throughout the north about Red Sky. As I said, I'm certainly was quite ignorant of Red Sky when I came here, so that's all I'm saying. We would be more concerned with the contractors in our own constituency than what somebody else was doing or not doing in another constituency. But it's been said this morning that there was a problem, obviously, with Red Sky, and it wasn't just in West Belfast, it was throughout the contracts that they were doing, to a larger or lesser extent. So it seems to me that there's also been an inference that the sectarian, in inverted commas, element came in for complaints from West Belfast. So it seems to me that maybe representatives, public and community representatives, and indeed tenants in West Belfast were simply being more vociferous in complaining and possibly in other areas. I mean, would that be something that you would like to comment upon?
I think what actually happened here is that the problem started in West Belfast with an under-resourced contractor who started, once he came under intense pressure, to spread the resources, and what happened was he was spreading his resource so thin that then the problem started to pop up in East Belfast and North Belfast. So it was actually swinging around the city according to where the greatest pressure was being exerted, politically and otherwise, and organisationally, for Red Sky. I think that is the best explanation I can give to the committee.
Well, you did say earlier that their capacity increased by over 200%.
Their workload.
No, their workload increased.
Sorry, but
Yeah.
then presumably then the capacity had to increase to take up on that type of work.
Yeah, but my
As you
view is you
said-
couldn't, because of the labour market at the time.
Yes,
you
so
really
they did
couldn't-
make that point in
couldn't,
fairness because of the private developments that were being built at that time. People were going to the south as well to work in terms of construction. I know in my own constituency that was very much the case. So they had difficulty getting tradesmen, basically.
Yeah.
Who would be capable of carrying out the specifications that were required in particular instances.
Absolutely.
Would you accept that?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, Summer.
Okay. Colin, just take you back, first of all, to what you'd said about the amount of overpayment and the area around the kitchens, etc.
Yeah.
What was the legal advice that the Housing Executive had received about, first of all, how robust any assessment of overpayment could be? What was it ever drawn to your attention? It might be.
Yes, at the time of the, I think the legal advice was very clear that we were being continually undermined in our dealings with Red Sky because of officer error. Indeed, the police said the same thing to us at one stage as well when we referred it for potential fraud. Police views, how would you expect us to handle this until you clean up your own act? So, yeah, I mean, that was apparent in the 260,000. There was a significant amount of money, I think 47,000 or something involved in terms of what you broadly call staff error. There was the whole issue of kitchens, which I'll certainly not go into again, but it was that. And there was various other aspects. What was deemed to be included in the contract, where Red Sky were saying one thing, staff were agreeing. It's my central contract staff were saying, you shouldn't have approved that as being deemed. That is included within the contract terms. You shouldn't be paying for it as an extra. So,
That being the case, would it not have been? Was it not appropriate that you had the best people on your side and on Red Sky's side sitting down to try and work out the mess that had been created?
that's exactly the stage that it arrived at. I mean, at the end of the day, this became so divisive that, I mean, it was down to me as director to sit down with the head of Red Sky and try as best we could to resolve it. Absolutely.
And in light of the legal advice you've been given, the complexity that you knew about the payment system and the kind of mess that the payment system was in, do you find it surprising at the conclusion that the chairman of Red Sky, who had financial knowledge, should have not been the most appropriate person for you to deal with?
No, I would repeat what I said earlier. I was thankful for that the chairman of Red Sky intervened in this and helped us reach a conclusion. And yes, you're right. A legal advisor at 6 separate meetings. They had internal meetings to make sure that the legal position was clear. I think his view at the time was take whatever you can get and run, because at the pace of abatement that we were hitting the overpayment with, it was going to arrive at a stage where we were going to have to pay Red Sky. So the answer was let's clear the decks here, let's get as much as we can, and then let's try and start again here and manage our way through what is an intensely difficult situation, both for staff, I might add, as well, and for the contractor. So it wasn't a very happy situation, but I thought at the time we'd made enough progress to move to the next stage being an improvement in the performance of Red Sky and an improvement in the performance of some staff. I got to emphasise, just some staff. I mean, one of the things, if I had to do this all over again, is I would stop performance measuring district offices. I would start performance measuring individual officers and their performance in these contracts, rather than the performance of another.
The answers that Mr. Kitson you have given, and Mr. McIntyre has given, has caused some confusion as to whether or not value for money was obtained when it came to the kitchens. I don't know whether it was post-form, pro-form, anti-form, or what uniform, or what kind of kitchens we're talking about. But in your assessment, regardless of what designation you attach to the kitchens, did the Housing Executive pay the appropriate money to Red Sky for the kitchens on the basis of what the housing executive asked for?
I would say on a value for money basis, yes. I mean, I'm not saying this, by the way, as a detached director. I actually went out and seen the kitchens that Red Sky had installed and compared it against our normal standard. I mean, the tenant reaction to this was quite extraordinary. Indeed, we actually brought tenant groups to a one-day event the problem here is Red Sky were bringing the kitchens in from England, which was cutting local suppliers out of the equation. And we brought local suppliers to the table as well, and between us all we came to a new standard, a new type of relationship that local suppliers would get their chance at the new kitchens that we were going to install.
In March, and I know that the letter came from Paddy McIntyre, but in March of 2009, in response to, and we'll find out what it was in response to later on, it was indicated that termination of the contract was not something that should be rushed into because of the administrative issues that were involved, the back payments or the slowness of payments, etc. What was your view about the termination of the Red Sky contract?
See, remember, on foot of this, I set aside all the cyclical programme of RIU and redirected them full-time on Red Sky in an attempt to try and get sufficient information to... I wouldn't have thought terminate all the contracts. I was of a view back in 2009 that, again, we should have gone back to where we were in 2007 and pick off their worst performing offices and terminate them, but hold them in other offices. I mean, I wasn't of a view that Red Sky should have been put to the sword per se back in 2009. No, I wasn't. But the evidence, it was still questionable on the foot of the 2009. It doesn't matter what the draft report, the final report, on the basis of that, it was still questionable whether we had sufficient data, robust information, represented in the way I wanted it, to terminate the contracts. I think we probably had enough to terminate one, but at that stage that the Chief Executive, Paddy, decided he wanted more. He wanted something which he could stand up in court with and say, this is the basis upon which I terminated one or more of these contracts.
Advice to, well, it eventually went to Brian Roundtree, but it was sent to Francis Gallagher, the head of legal services, first of all. Brett Lockhart is quoted as saying, in respect of termination of the contract, I appreciate there are strong political pressures being exerted for the termination the contract. That was a letter, and that was way back in November 2010.
Yeah, it was after me.
Are you aware of where those political pressures are coming from?
That would have been after post my involvement, but I mean, I can clearly say the committee, I was never brought under any political pressure to do anything, either to keep or terminate contracts of any type.
Okay, so the political pressures did not occur while you were in post. So it was subsequent you being.
Could you just remind us when you left post?
March 2010, I had no further involvement in these contracts.
Had you left housing?
No, I was sick from that time.
Okay, Tom, I'd like to just ask a couple of wee points. Just going back, I think there was allegations of sectarian motivation for complaints coming from West Belfast, and you've dealt with that, and Paddy McIntyre's dealt with that, and others have dealt with that as well. Stuart Cuddick. You've also, in your evidence, presented that there was a number of complaints coming from the Shankill area, for example, which you mentioned specifically. Mostly, I think you might have said, from the community networks. Was there any suggestion that those complaints were motivated by sectarianism?
No, none whatsoever. I mean, I went into the Shankill, saw the problem.
I mean, you've given evidence that there was a lot of complaints coming from that area, and all I'm asking, were those motivated by sectarianism?
Well, I can confirm that the complaints in the Shankill were totally justified.
Yeah, I know you said that in both, by the way, but I'm just not asking the question. Given your own submission and where you outline a range of measures that you have put in, not least your last comments, that you redirected all of the RIU's focus on Red Sky, were you accused of having a sectarian motivation?
Me, personally?
I mean, well, if you look at the information you've given us in your submission, which obviously would say that you took a lot of measures, including seeking to terminate Red Sky's contract.
Yeah.
Were you ever accused personally of having a sectarian motivation?
No, I wasn't, no.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay.
Just one on the issue that you raised about I can't remember the word you used about Red Sky's excellent performance when you were talking about their volatility, but I know it doesn't happen very often, but whenever people might commend contractors or the executive for the outstanding nature of the work, whenever that happened, I think you said about when, for example, in flooding, Red Sky were particularly good. Did anybody infer that there was any sectarian differentiation about Red Sky's good performance as well as the bad performance?
No.
Okay.
Okay, there's no other members indicating to speak. Colin, again, you've heard, and the procedure is normally, look, we've heard the session this morning, and I do appreciate your attendance this morning, providing the written submission in advance of that, and dealing with the questions as they've been put to you. I know these are very, sometimes awkward and sensitive issues, so appreciate people's ability, for the most part, very professionally to deal with all these things. So the way in which we do our business here, we will assess the evidence that we've heard today in due course and as soon as possible, and obviously we may want to seek further information or clarification, and we've already indicated that in one aspect of the evidence today. Likewise, I'm giving a standing invitation to yourself if you wanted any time to come back to us with any additional information or clarity or whatever else, feel free to do that. Is there anything you want to say this morning before we conclude this particular session, just in conclusion?
No, I don't think so. Other than to say, I have to repeat what Paddy said. I don't think Red Sky makes a summer. I still am proud of the housing executive and all that it achieved over many years in the public service of the people of Northern Ireland.
Okay, Colin, thank you very much for that, and good luck this morning. Okay, thanks very much.
Chairman, before we close the public session, could we get some clarification on the point that I had raised at the very start? Because there is still doubt as to, although there's evidence of the performance of Red Sky in West Belfast, parts of the contract, there is still a disproportionate number, and the evidence given to this morning, a disproportionate number of complaints made in West Belfast as opposed to anything else about Red Sky. There have been allegations by Red Sky of sectarian discrimination against them, and some of that would have been reinforced by complaints made by representatives from West Belfast, some of whom are on this committee. Now, all I want to know is, since some of the people sitting in this committee instigated some of the complaints which we are now questioning officials about, is there a need at the start of any session where we're discussing the performance of Red Sky for those members who were part of what Red Sky would allege is a sectarian complaint to declare an interest, because they actually are part of some of what we're investigating here today was due to representations made by people in this committee. I want a ruling on that.
Well, simple
because to me, there is an interest which some members in this committee have in the kind of, first of all, in the kind of questions they might ask and the direction they would want to take witnesses.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to read it, and we'll go off and check out information. I'm happy to. Not a problem.
A couple of miscellaneous things. In light of this morning, I assume we will now write to Mr. Kitson and give him the opportunity to comment on what has been said both by Mr. McIntyre and the other gentleman. I think there also is now occasion perhaps to write to Mr. Cushnan to invite him to elaborate on the dirty linen washing allegation. And on that, my understanding is that BBC have not yet produced the letter that they've quoted from, where that is contained. So I think we do need to be pushing very hard to get that. So,
You haven't? Sorry, gentlemen, I'm just checking. Okay. They say they will give us more information, so we will double check, Jim, on that, because I presume we already had that. So.
and the third thing, Sammy raised the point quite properly about what's in Brett Lockhart's advices. Now, the Housing Executive has chosen to share that legal advice with us, but legal advice is always based upon a response to instructions. It's very unlikely that Council would draw from his own knowledge to say there are strong political pressures. So I think we should be asking the Housing Executive to outline the instructions they gave to Mr. Lockhart touching upon that issue.
Yep.
Because he's unlikely to have said that, I would have thought, without it coming from instructions. So I think we should hear where that came from.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay, members, so I think that there was lunch organised due to the interaction with the members in the last few weeks that no lunch been provided. So it's a short break and then we'll have some other committee business to conclude. It's not that long, it won't take that long actually, but there is a lunch and a short break, maybe 20 minutes or so.
Could I ask,
Sorry, Jim,
all the business we have, does it require quorum? Are we going to have quorum?
With agreement and correspondence.
On Gallery event, which some of us are going to.
I'm speaking at it, and so's Mickey, and Gregory's going.
If there's any business that requires quorum, we maybe should do it now.
Well, we have a social housing allocation policy review. The committee would prefer members to be here for that.
Yeah.
Actually, are the officials available for that? No, are
I
they?
think so. No,
What time will it be available at?
they'll not be available until this afternoon.
What time are members? I know I need to be away here by 2 at the outside. Probably before that.
The prostate cancer event starts, well, I need to be up there about 1:45. So I would imagine that will be over probably about 1:45. And I'm the chair, I'm chairing it, so I need to be there to the end.
Are we going to have a problem with the quorum? It looks like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anybody who can be here for, will the resume here say 10 to 1, quarter to 1? But, because you can finish off.
How long's the next session likely to take, Chairman? I could stay to 1:30.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
approximately do half one.
Okay. Well, if we can we can probably do the rest of it and leave the review of social housing allocations policy because people won't be here. If they come in and we can deal with that quickly, then we can deal with it. But I don't think we need a quorum of that anyway.
No, Chair, there's no decisions required in relation to either of the two briefings this afternoon. The only issue that we have really, we've got the two briefings and we have correspondence.
Yeah. So
Two briefings?
Yes.
it's claimant satisfaction survey results, actually. But
Oh, yes, that's a briefing as well.
Yeah, and it won't take that long, really. So if we can take like a 15-minute break here and then resume again, can members do that? And then we'll just go through whatever we can get through as expeditions. Thank you, members. Public session then. Sorry about that, members. Okay, so just dealing swiftly then, quickly with the review of social housing allocations policy. Members agree then we'll ask to defer this particular session, but we're advised that the department wants to publish the research information. Is that right?
That's correct.
Are members content with that? That'll go ahead today anyhow, and then we'll deal with that as quickly as we possibly can. Thanks for that, members. And turn to the claimant satisfaction survey. Just in terms of what we need to do with that.
It's really just a brief.
It's just to take a briefing from the department. Are members happy enough then again we'll seek to defer this particular item? Okay. Members may want to, if they've already have a look at it, they may want to maybe issue some comments back to the clerks here over the next maybe few days if they get a few minutes maybe. That'll help us to expedite to having the session. On the correspondence, and I'm just going to ask people if they're just happy enough to endorse the correspondence per memo.
Great.
Members happy enough with that? Okay, and then the forward work programme, we've already agreed that the clerks here will take responsibility for scheduling next music site as well as scheduling the forward work programme. Okay, on that basis then, is there any other business from any member? No, on that basis then, the meeting stands adjourned until next Thursday night. Thank you, members.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.